Hi, I'm Trent McFadyen with Project InnerSpace, and welcome to this session of Pivot. This session is titled Avenues for Fast Deployment, Geothermal Coalitions in Traditional Energy States. U.S. energy markets are changing at a record pace. When you look back at the history of energy transitions from wood to coal, then from coal to oil, from oil to natural gas, and now from a fossil fuel-based economy towards carbon neutral sources of energy, renewable sources of energy. The pace at which those changes, those technologies entered into the US energy mix is getting faster and faster. And the pressure to accelerate the renewable energy transition is increasing as impacts from climate change are witnessed all around the world. We just experienced the hottest summer on record, and international and nationally, politicians and people everywhere are recognizing the increasing need to accelerate the transition. But that transition does face a lot of hurdles. Permitting and development is really challenging right now. Despite the federal government investing billions of dollars into the green energy transition, that funding faces a lot of obstacles. From Project InnerSpace's perspective, the most important thing is getting drills in the ground and hot water flowing up out of the ground. But there is a recognition that we can't do that without the right policy and community support. And so my group of panelists today come from four different traditional energy states. And each of them have a different perspective that they're going to share with us about what it means to accelerate the geothermal transition in alphabetical order, so as to eliminate bias by last name. Our first panelist is Bryce Carter Bryce is the Emerging Markets Program Manager for Geothermal in the Colorado Energy Office. Prior to joining the Colorado Energy Office, Bryce worked in various roles in other renewable energy industries and as working for environmental groups. And Bryce can share more about his background as well as we move through the panel. Next is Kelsey Putnam Hughes. Kelsey is the Director of Energy Tech with Tulsa Innovation Labs. Kelsey is a geologist by background. She started her career working in oil and gas before she moved into the renewable energy industry and founded solar development companies, multiple solar development companies. And so I'm really excited for what Kelsey can share with us about her time as a solar developer and how that's going to apply in the geothermal context. Brian Regli is the Executive Director of Critical Investments in the Office of Governor Josh Shapiro from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Brian has a long history of public service experience. I wouldn't do it justice to go through and name all of it, but Brian's in charge of deploying all of the federal funding that the federal government has given towards infrastructure in the state of Pennsylvania, 19 billion plus as he tries to win competitive grants. Brian has a doctorate in development economics from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. And his early career was in real estate development. And last but certainly not least, Matt Welch is the Executive Vice President from the Texas Geothermal Energy Alliance. Matt also has a career in public service. Matt founded and is the president of Horizon Public Affairs, an Austin-based public affairs consulting firm that he has worked at for, I think, more than a decade.
Too long.
And Yeah, yeah. Uh, I'll stop there. Apologies if I butchered any of those. But so in order to get me to stop talking and invite everybody else into the conversation, I want to go back to the title of our panel here: Avenues for Fast Deployment. And this first question is for Matt and Bryce. Both Colorado and Texas have adopted new next generation geothermal regulations just in the past 12 months. And the question is, how are those regulations designed to impact the speed of geothermal deployment? Matt or Bryce, either of you who wants to go first?
I'll jump out there and go first. Thank you, Trent, and my fellow panelists. Thanks. I feel wholly inadequate being on the same panel with you all. So um, grant me some slack here as we talk about the technical aspects of geothermal. This is also a plug for the panel after us. It is a feature on a deep dive on the Texas legislative session. So I encourage you all to stay tuned for the session after us, where our general counsel, Ben Seabury, will give you the nuts and bolts of a very successful legislative session. So stay tuned for that. I can talk briefly about speeding up the challenges of the geothermal deployment, at least in Texas. We went to our membership, which is comprised of people all up and down the supply chain. It's comprised of academics, municipal utilities, private utilities, and really the whole sector. And we said, what are the challenges to deployment? So we started with them on kind of a listening tour before our legislative session. And one of the things that they suggested was, let's get one-stop shopping in place for anybody who needs to get a geothermal permit. And so we identified that one agency, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, had oversight of a particular aspect of closed well permitting. And we talked to all the parties involved, including where it's at and where it was going to be. And everybody was amenable to moving all geothermal related permitting requirements under one roof in Texas. And so that aspect rests right now with the Texas Railroad Commission. We find that one-stop shopping is a lot more helpful in drawing new industry to Texas. And our job is to make it as easy as possible for companies to start their projects. So consolidation and one-stop shopping was something we thought was very important.
Matt, Bryce, want to go to you here just briefly. Matt, as I understand it, there was a portion of geothermal regulation that was under the Department of Environmental Quality, and that permitting timeline was, I know this is probably getting into what the next session is going to go into, but as I understand it, that permitting timeline was much slower than what the Railroad Commission is able to do. Is that right?
Yeah, I think historically there's a different mindset at each of those agencies. The Railroad Commission, and we're obviously TxGEA, my trade association, is honored to have a former chairman of the Texas Railroad Commission as our chairman, named Barry Smitherman. And we just simply pride ourselves on being efficient and effective and making those processes as less cumbersome as possible. So red tape is the enemy of Texans who want to do more on geothermal energy. And that's why we moved everything to the Railroad Commission. Railroad Commission takes about 30 days. And I say that to my good friends in Nevada, Ormat. God bless you all for what you're enduring out there in your process to get a simple project up and running. I think you're on your 10th year. And it's not going to come as a surprise to anybody that we're using that, not pejoratively, but we're using it as a marketing tool of why projects should come to Texas, is because we have certainty and predictability in our regulatory scheme.
Bryce, how are the Colorado regs designed to speed up deployment?
Yeah, and I think to start talking from the Colorado perspective, being one of the first states where we've established a renewable portfolio standard, much of where our approach has been is kind of the vision of collaboration and learning. We've been working with the coal industry and especially the oil and gas industry with first-in-class standards to protect the environment and have safeguards, and also understanding we're in the midst of a pretty enormous transition. Our state goal now is to decarbonize our economy by 2050. And so seeing the opportunity that came from the Inflation Reduction Act and seeing how can Colorado take the most advantage of that is where much of these conversations came from. See not only leveraging those funds, but understanding that geothermal in particular has a key role to play as a firm standard or firm basis for electricity, as well as reducing peak loads. We're talking about low temperature geothermal. And so we were able to look at our Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. They've been rebranded as the Energy and Carbon Management Commission, and they're going to be focused on deep geothermal regulations. And much of the current scope is really assessing what are the resources in Colorado, how do we make sure we identify them and then deploy them, engaging with rulemaking with the industry to understand, what are those best practices and lessons learned we've had from the oil and gas industry, knowing that many of those stakeholders are the same folks that are looking to expand into the geothermal space, but also not burden it with regulations. Obviously, when you're talking about geothermal, it is different depending on the types of systems you're talking about, whether it's enhanced or closed loop systems. So not only is it about the regulations and figuring out those pathways, but we also lined up a lot of supportive funds to figure out how do we accelerate the adoption of industry. So I manage the Geothermal Energy Grant Program, which is $12 million for both low temperature and high temperature projects, a grant program to really accelerate it. And from that, we actually have established a larger tax credit package meant to complement the IRA worth about over $1 billion. And so about 140 million of that is focused on geothermal just in Colorado, helping accelerate adoption of high temperature electricity projects, again, low temperature projects. So really opening up the market to show that Colorado is a place to invest in and continue to inform our regulations to make sure that this is something that can not only support our goals economy-wide, but make sure that we're doing it in the communities that are facing the transition that's happening now.
Yeah. So two points I want to call out there. Colorado has this question of speed of deployment. One of the mechanisms that Colorado has chosen to pursue is you mentioned there that $1 billion renewable energy tax credit with 140 million dedicated specifically to geothermal projects and using tax credits as a means of incentivizing developers. Is that, did I hear that right?
Yeah, and it's broken down as we look at different elements, but it really is, it's refundable tax credits, looking at what it means for ground source, heat pumps, geo-exchange network systems, all the way up to the electricity development, really demonstrating, getting those demonstration projects in the grounds, moving them forward to demonstrate the role that geothermal can have in the grid of the future as we look at our decarbonization goals by 2050.
So Texas looked at permitting timelines and said, well, if we can do one-stop shop, then that'll incentivize developers. Colorado, in addition to doing that with renaming of the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission to the Energy and Carbon Management Commission, also implemented some tax credits. Kelsey, I want to go to you, and you spent a career, or the last part of your career was as a solar energy developer.
Right.
How did coalitions of government, community, civic, how did their support or the lack thereof impact the speed at which you were able to develop solar projects? And what should the geothermal community learn from your experience there?
Right. Well, it's a great question. I think first needing to address that, yes, I'm a geoscientist and went from oil and gas to solar and not actually geothermal. So already kind of starting off 1 foot off the wagon there. But from the perspective of being involved within the solar space, the technology within solar and wind really has a massive leg up on the geothermal space at the moment and some of the other resources. And that comes from prior investment and dedication from both federal and state levels in those technologies, and offering incentives for that implementation 10 years ago. I think we're at that same point with geothermal right now. So I think that is basically really the main difference that we're going to see, is now we have the advantage of being able to kind of look back, like you said, on some of these other technologies and what are those lessons learned. I think for those of us that are in these traditional energy states, we have a very unique advantage in that we have context to work from. We have allegedly some sort of procedural process of how to implement and deploy, permit, and then distribute the power or energy generated from those energy projects. So how does that fit within the geothermal space? I think we have a huge leg up at this point because it is so closely aligned technology-wise, and the construction process of these types of energy projects, because it's basically the same kind of thing with oil and gas. We're still putting a bit in the ground. We're still engaging the subsurface. So we have a lot of that experience already. This is not necessarily a net new process. We're still having land development that needs to occur. We're going to have to engage a lot of the same types of professionals. And that's what I actually took away from the solar industry, was that it was being used as if it were a net new process. And from the construction side, I found that grossly inadequate because they were essentially not utilizing lessons learned from other resources. So they were not basically applying the same types of permitting rigor or pre-site construction processes that, say, oil and gas does. So that was something that I saw as a distinct need within the solar space, was actually to treat it genuinely as an energy project. And so how are those processes lined out for all energy projects? So I think that's really appropriate from the perspective of Texas, is that have a one-stop shop, eliminate wherever those barriers are. We're all energy professionals. We know where those barriers are already existing. So being able to smooth them out can really deploy not just geothermal projects very quickly and efficiently, but also co-located projects, which is really probably what we're going to be encountering quite a lot, especially in these legacy energy states.
Yeah. So even though geothermal is, maybe 10, 15 years behind on receiving federal funding, which we are now receiving for the first time, because the industry is already viewing development through the lens of, we know how to do this. This isn't some new process that we have to implement, but solar and wind 10, 15 years ago, they were like, we have to invent a whole new process, whole cloth. Yeah. So automatically geothermal is going to benefit in that way.
Absolutely.
That's very insightful.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, you spent a career in commercial real estate development. I wonder if it's not similar to kind of what Kelsey was just saying there of, building geothermal is not some new, unique construction process. What lessons from your career in real estate development would you aim to, or are you bringing in your role as the infrastructure coordinator for the state of Pennsylvania?
Well, I agree with you. Kelsey nailed it in terms of the business process issues around construction need to be considered holistically.
Right.
And obviously, I would love to be able to say, as Matt is saying, that, hey, we can cut through red tape and it's 30 days in Pennsylvania. I can't make that representation. I'd love to. I'd love to make the representation that Bryce is making, that, hey, we're ready with financial resources to help to incent. I think all of those make a lot of sense. But let me take 2 seconds as a bit of a framing. Pennsylvania has made some substantial advances in the last 9 months on the general area permitting. And one of the first things that Governor Shapiro did was he signed an executive order to create an Office of Transformation and Opportunity. And we are mapping to the FAST 41 processes of the White House to determine how we can basically green light projects more rapidly using, processes that cut across all the various agencies. And it's been a wonderful experience working with my colleague, Ben Kirshner, who runs that group, and hand in hand with him on all of these infrastructure projects to begin to cut red tape, as Matt has said. And within the Department of Environmental Protection, within our oil and gas division, there is the equivalent of a one-stop shop. But this is where I have to be, I think, a bit of a caveat. We do not have primacy in Pennsylvania. It makes a huge difference. Now, the good news is we have great partners at EPA Region 3. We're already talking to them about how a Class 5 injection well would be essentially permitted within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But I can't promise anybody that it's days or weeks. It is probably 6 months coming into the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which frankly, compared to other types of permits, hey, that's not that bad. But now I'm going to put it within the context of what Kelsey's talking about. When you are building a project of complexity, permitting is one of a number of components that have to run in parallel. And ultimately, if there's enough reassurance from government agencies and organizations that, hey, we're going to make this work, we're going to make this happen, there's going to be other pieces that have to fall into place. You're going to have financing that you have to organize. You're going to have to get connected to the grid. And one of the advantages we have in Pennsylvania is that we do have a lot of headspace on a lot of transmission that runs through the western part of our state, because historically we have been the battery of PJM, which is our ISO, our Interconnection Service Organization. 30% of the electricity generated, in Pennsylvania is exported. So what that means is, unfortunately, is we lose, parts of the fossil fleet, and that's unfortunate from a jobs creation and from an economic energy perspective. The fortune is that we have pad sites, we have transmission, we have physical interconnection to the grid that a lot of other states don't have. So I wish I could say we had the geothermal gradient of Colorado. We don't. I wish we could say we have the 30 days that Texas has. But Pennsylvania does have certain advantages relative to those infrastructure components. And from a business process perspective, to your point, when you build an office building, when you build a residential apartment complex, when you build a retail center, all of which I've done, you are running all of these in parallel because you have to. You're never going to get the project done unless you stage all those various components. So hopefully, what we can do in Pennsylvania are find the partners in the oil and gas industry and in other communities of interest that want to invest in geothermal and find ways to perhaps mitigate some of the disadvantages that we honestly have by amplifying the resources that we have and the experience that we have across this and other domains. So that's the reason why we're here today. We do believe geothermal has a really bright future in Pennsylvania, and we're hoping to learn from Colorado and Texas and from people like Kelsey and find the right partnerships along the way.
So what I heard there, sorry, Bryce, did you want to jump in?
Oh, go ahead.
What I heard there is, being able to run multiple processes in tandem. It's not just permitting, it's securing of financing, it's having interconnection. Pennsylvania doesn't necessarily have the geothermal gradient, but you have this long history with PJM and at least on the interconnection side. On the financing side, you don't yet have the tax credits. Maybe that's a future opportunity for helping with the financing. Did I hear all of that right?
No, you did. I mean, and look, within the governor's policy office, there's a whole variety of considerations, that we are learning from Colorado, we're learning from Texas. And the hope is to take, the best of those experiences and find ways to promote geothermal within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And this is where we have a tremendous workforce. I mean, we have a community of people that invented fracking, that are a part of our core community. And so we expect that the human resources, the human capital associated with Pennsylvania is going to be a crucial part of this as well. We have reason to believe that geothermal has a bright future. We have work to do, to put ourselves in a position where we can move more quickly on permitting. And the extent to which we can't, we're going to try to work everything in parallel so that all of these, opportunities arrive at the same location and the same project opportunity as they arise. Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Trent,
Please.
I was going to just say, we ought to embrace competition. This is a good thing that states are looking to each other for best practices. And if Brian's jealous of Texas is jealous of Colorado, and we all look at what each other's doing and want to do it better, faster, and bring more deployment as quickly as possible.
Just never mistake that we're jealous of the Dallas Cowboys, because it's just not going to happen in Pennsylvania. Otherwise, absolutely.
You had to go there with the Cowboys, didn't
I'm sorry,
you?
I had to. I'm a Philadelphian. I got to do it at least once.
And I'll just
But I think
Please.
to both Matt and honestly everyone, the entire panel's point is that I think it's really based on what is your region good at? What out even within the geothermal space, what is conceivably possible, and what part of that value chain can your basin or your region really enhance and uplift? Oklahoma, we're probably not going to be very high on the list for hot rocks. We just don't really have them unless we want to drill real deep. So barring that, it really seems like geothermal offers a really fantastic supplementary like heat sink potential for our additional projects that we're running within the state. But what else is Oklahoma good at? I noticed no one said that they were jealous of Oklahoma, so I do just want to point that out. But
Kelsey, we're jealous of Oklahoma too.
Excellent, good. But for like the Tulsa region specifically, we have additional really fantastic opportunities in that it really excels at advanced manufacturing. So this kind of unlocks additional opportunities within that larger energy space to go, okay, well, we can produce the power, we can move it around, speaking to the level of interconnection and the distribution of the power that you're generating. But then we can also make the things that make the power. So that to me really represents the advantages of our different regions, and that it doesn't necessarily speak to competition as just there are certain regions that will have certain uplifts and enhancements that they're contributing to the larger good of the energy sector in the geothermal space.
Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize this is an emerging market. We're seeing all sorts of clever ways of deploying this technology. Colorado, we're learning from others too. Looking at New York's clean heat plan, looking at Nevada working with their geothermal. So how do we take these lessons learned and apply them on the ground, knowing that we have diversity in our state. So what are those stories that are going to be told on the local community level? We have mountain towns that are at the end of a radial power line. So if you're looking at not only electricity generation with geothermal, but then you have that co-benefit of a heating district that could come from that. So I think there's a lot of applications that we should be communicating and learning from each other. In fact, Oklahoma, a compliment, as I know, CTEI Energy, they were looking at air source heat pumps and realized they were having grid capacity challenges. So they flipped their incentives to support ground source geothermal, and they look at it as a thermal battery, and they've been able to balance out their peak loads. So, it's those types of examples I think we need to keep elevating and communicating and fostering that vision. That's going to cause the acceleration we need.
Yes.
Thanks everybody for those comments. I love the framing of speed. In order to accelerate deployment, look at what each state inherently has as traditional energy states. Each state, in some instances you share common traits, but in some instances you have unique aspects. Colorado, Texas, probably a little bit hotter from a ground temperature perspective, but Pennsylvania and Oklahoma. Pennsylvania is a traditional energy exporter. Oklahoma with the manufacturing. So just being able to look at what those existing strengths are and utilizing those to accelerate deployment. That kind of goes to I think maybe we'll get to this a little bit later, but recommendations that you would have for other states. But I think probably just already the recommendation is look at if it's a state that's not represented on this panel, but that is a traditional energy state, look at what it is that you are already good at, and then apply that in order to subsequently accelerate geothermal development. I want to move on. We're actually running out of time here, but I want to move on to kind of the second half of our panel title, which is Geothermal Coalitions in Traditional Energy States. I want to talk about that traditional energy piece. Coal, oil, gas. Conventional wisdom is that when an incumbent industry is threatened by a disruptor, they defend themselves. But I think from Project InnerSpace's perspective, our entire view is that geothermal is not, in fact, a disruption to at least to the traditional oil and gas, both conventional and unconventional oil and gas industry. And in fact, I just came from a geothermal conference, and there were even a lot of conversations about the reuse of coal mines and hot water that happens to be residing in coal mines. So just an open question for everybody on the panel. How are the traditional energy players, the oil and gas sector and the coal industries, what coal industry remains, engaging in each of your states on the geothermal front? Maybe Brian, do you want to maybe
Sure,
go first?
Look, we have had the privilege and the honor of engaging with every leading coal and oil and gas industry player in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania over the last 8-9 months. Active conversations around what their investment strategies are, not just in terms of their core business, but also some of the innovation that they see. And ultimately, it's a land planning exercise. They have existing wells that are eliminated, being worn down. They're not going to produce in 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. What are you going to do with those? You have coal concessions that will last 10, 15, 20, 25 years, but you have long-term land use issues. And I think everyone in those environments are looking for those long tail investments that are going to create durable cash flows for their shareholders and their owners. That's what they're responsible to do. The interesting question for us in the Commonwealth is that because our regulatory regime was established, frankly, long before the EPA was ever formed, we have some significant disadvantages relative to the history and legacy of these industries. We have literally hundreds of thousands of abandoned oil and gas wells that have been orphaned that we essentially control. We have hundreds of thousands of acres of abandoned mine lands that have gone through bankruptcy that we effectively control. Now, that makes a very interesting opportunity for us in the Commonwealth because we are now essentially one of the largest asset owners of all of these assets. And they could be assets. Right now they're liabilities, but they could be assets. Mm-hmm. So part of what we're seeking are partnerships with companies that are willing to look at those assets. And yeah, you can pour $90,000 of concrete down a well and cap it, but there may be opportunities to either reuse or reconsider. And this is where Department of Energy and other technology providers are standing forth and saying, hey, we could do something with these liabilities. Maybe we could turn them into assets. So for us in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, what we're trying to do is be very creative in building these coalitions and understanding how new technologies can apply. And again, to your earlier point, looking at these competitive advantages. And since we're running out of time, I'm just going to say one more thing. To your point, every single state has to look at their own capabilities, opportunities, leadership, build those relationships and coalitions. Pennsylvania likes to get its energy from the ground. It's kind of a historical fact. We drilled the first wells. We built some of the first coal mines, right? We do believe that it's a fundamental part of our culture. We're going to have to figure out how to map these opportunities to what Pennsylvania does. We're certainly looking for partnerships and learnings from other states to do that.
Matt, let's go to you. Engaging with the traditional energy players in the state of Texas on geothermal.
Sure. Well, we view them as kind of one and the same. The traditional oil and gas companies, for the most part, are either in with both feet or dipping their toes into the geothermal space. It was my observation early on that many of the heavy industry hitters were providing capital to some startups, or they simply purchased the startups and rolled them into the company. And, in Texas, there is a long history of leadership from the Texas Oil and Gas Association, and they are an extremely powerful trade association. And if you want to be successful, you better start with them, because when they're against you, you're not going to be able to achieve success. So one of the first doors we knocked on was TxGEA, our oil and gas association. We kind of showed them our cards. We wanted to allay any concerns so that they heard from us first and foremost, rather than word on the street. And so it was kind of the first stop on a mini stop process to kind of get people to buy in. And, we were ecstatic that oil and gas giants really were knocking on our door wanting to join. It was phenomenal. And, the bottom line is, if you can drill an oil well, you can drill a geothermal well. And they see it as a logical expansion of their industry sector. And we were the beneficiary of that kind of convergence of oil and gas wanting to do more on geothermal. It was not a difficult sell. They wanted to join us and support us and be part of our effort this last legislative session.
Yeah. Kelsey, I know Tulsa Innovation Labs has some traditional energy partners that y'all are working with. Can you talk about your engagement there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, as a very traditional oil and gas state, we actually do have a number of large corporate partners and smaller partners as well that are pivoting. So we have, Devon and we have H&P that are most notably, co-investors in Fervo. Incidentally, the CEO of Fervo was a graduate of the University of Tulsa, just down the street here. So we are all in on geothermal here in Tulsa, it seems. But I say that in the sense that these legacy energy producers and distributors and practitioners, they need a place to go. They need some place to deploy and retool these technologies, these workflows, and this entire industry. And how can they best do that? Well, I think they're doing the exact same thing that we are talking about as a state, is look in your portfolio. What do you do well? H&P they're drillers. So they're going to be able to, as you mentioned earlier, convert very easily from drilling an oil and gas well to geothermal. And it's really essentially the same. This is just a new flavor of resource, really. And I think that, 10 years ago, when I first started as a geologist in Tulsa, that would have been an unacceptable answer. Now I am shocked and really, really excited by the advent of basically this inclusion of new technologies and new resources as a place to go, because ultimately these companies can convert to become energy companies, and that have specialties within specific resources. So I think if it's applied in that way, deployment can go very, very fast.
For someone like H&P,
Kelsey wins. She used the word pivot. She wins the
yeah. Do I get an award for that? I'm working that in. Yeah.
We'll send you a gift basket.
Maybe sash. Fine too.
Yeah. Helmer & Payne, H&P is a drilling company. Drilling a geothermal well is for them, it's easier than building a solar installation.
Right.
Even if they built a solar installation, understanding that it's just a normal construction project.
Exactly.
Yeah. Bryce, back with us. Talk to us about how you're engaging with traditional energy players in your state in just a minute here.
Yeah, I think so much of it is about showing up in the community and really listening to the needs. And I think that's been reflected here is really listening to the industry. Obviously, there are both the challenges of the transition, but the opportunities as we see the available assets, whether it's transmission capacity or certainly the skill sets and the workforce experience in the field. So I think there's a role to play as we look at kind of the big picture. How do we facilitate those different puzzle pieces in different regions to make the connections and facilitate the dialogues that lead to investment, lead to projects, and keeping jobs where they belong in the community, serving the families that have been there for generations? There is no easy pathway to do that, but I think, again, it just starts by showing up and listening. And for us, it's using that carrot method of, we have these resources, we understand the prioritization that's needed for disproportionately impacted communities, just transition communities. And so it's really understanding how do we apply those resources to move things forward. A drilling job is for shallow geothermal is not going to pay the same as something that's deep in terms of whether it's oil and gas or even for electricity. So as we look at gas distribution infrastructure, as we look at coal power plants, and we look at the technologies that geothermal can provide, I think it's really exploring the various applications of the technology, and again, how can it be adapted to meet the needs and the vision of what the local community has. And so I think that's really going to be critical, because you can have all the money in the world and all the regulations that are streamlined, but if the community is not on board, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, the traditional energy sector, those jobs, like you said, they don't have to go away. This is an opportunity to keep jobs in place and keep people around. We are down to 10 seconds. I just want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you for the session, and thanks everybody for watching.